So this is the ENLEUM HPA-23RM, and it's small. I mean, when I opened the box, I was actually quite shocked. I mean, you can see in photos, I mean, this is a 6.5mm headphone socket, so it should give you an idea how big it is. But, I mean, it's small enough that if I've got a shit audio magnet, actually a niche magnet, but same difference. It's actually smaller. When you compare it, it's actually smaller than one of these small amps. I mean, obviously it's longer, but, and well, it's thinner too. It's about the size of, well, say there's a Hugo 2 for comparison with a 2Go attached. And yeah, we're talking something similar in size. It's a little bit wider. Actually, of course, the Hugo 2 with the 2Go is going to be longer, but sort of comparable kind of thickness there. So it's small, and so you think, well, for $3,000, or in case $3,300 for the H version, which is the high power version, which comes with the Modhouse Tungsten, of which this is, well, what do you get? I mean, that seems like not a lot of amplifier compared to this kind of thing, which, you know, all this stuff sitting behind me. And actually way back, I tried, well, originally they were called Bakoon International, and it was an offshoot of a company in Japan called Bakoon. Unfortunately, both the international and the Japan bosses had a falling out. They split, went their separate ways and changed their business names, and so now you have ENLEUM. But back in the Bakoon International days, they actually had one of their earlier versions of this, the HPA-01, available on drop, or what was then called mass drop. And I had actually experienced the Bakoon Japan amps, and I thought this would be very cool to try out, so I bought one at a considerable discount off what they were normally selling. And I wasn't particularly impressed. I put up a review on HeadFi and then sold it and left it at that. Now, of course, then the director of what is now ENLEUM contacted me and asked me if I'd like to review the latest version. Actually, I did get it in for a review, shot a review, and then found out after I sent it back all my files were corrupt. So now we're trying again. So this is why it's later than it actually should be. And so this, and you're thinking, well, how about compared to the HPA-01? It's vastly better. And I'll say off the bat, yes, it does sound like a $3,000, or in this case, $3,300 amplifier. Absolutely there. But if you're thinking, well, okay, it's a headphone amplifier. It has, you know, a couple of inputs, 3.5mm RCA. Oh, it has a couple of headphone outputs and a volume control and a gain control. What's the big deal? Why is it $3,000? Well, it actually is not quite what you imagine. It actually has two amplifiers inside, and that's because one of the amplifiers uses current gain technology. And you're thinking, what the heck is that? Well, we've seen something similar before, as it's not totally unique, but, well, let's just talk about that. So a normal amplifier, the actual 3.5mm socket on here is a normal voltage amplifier, which is what most amplifiers are. They increase a voltage signal, a voltage analog signal, to make it bigger, basically, and then send it out to your headphones and drive your headphones well. Now, headphones, for example, have an impedance. You'll see a number like 32 ohms, which is very common, or you have things like, I think the Modhouse Tungsten are 140? I always forget the numbers, but much higher. And then you have, say, Sennheiser H800s or H800 series at 300 ohms, and then various planers between Dan Clark Audio is really low, somewhere like 14 ohms or something like that for some of their planers. And then you have the Susvara Unveiled back there, which is, was it 45 ohms? Anyway, yeah, there's a lot of variance in there. So it's how much impedance, how much resistance in ohms the headphones have actually on average for the amplifier to deal with. Now, normally a voltage amplifier will have what's called an output impedance, which is very low. So usually somewhere around 0 to 1 ohms or about 0 to 2 ohms, depending on the setup. And the reason they have this is twofold, basically. First is because when you put a signal through a electromagnetic driver, which is what most drivers are, they go through the voice coil or a trace which is around or between magnets, and that causes the diaphragm to move. That, of course, then the diaphragm will spring back. And when it springs back, it will actually create electricity and try and drive the amplifier back. So to have a very low output impedance, it can't really drive the amplifier back and you improve sound quality. It's also because a lot of headphones don't actually have just one impedance. The impedance may vary from 20 Hz through to 20 kHz. and be not entirely flat. Now, most planar headphones, most like Odyssey or Meze and the like, will have a flat impedance from 20 Hz to 20 kHz, which is no problem. But headphones such as the Sennheiser H800 series actually go up to 600 ohms in the mid bass and then drop back down to about 300 ohms. Now, normally this isn't a big issue, but current drive amps such as this one use a completely different system. Instead of having a very low output impedance, they have a very high output impedance in the mega ohms. So instead of driving the headphones using basically a voltage signal, it drives it using current, and that is converted into voltage by the headphones. And having a high output impedance means that the amount of gain you have, that is how much multiplication of the signal you get from what's incoming, changes with the impedance of the headphones. So the higher output impedance of the Modhouse Tungsten will increase the gain considerably of this amp. And that also means that if you don't have a flat output impedance like the H800 series, the gain will be according to the impedance, which means you get a huge boost in the mid bass when using it with the current output. Hence the additional amp with the voltage output. Likewise, a lot of IEMs can't deal with that kind of thing, have extremely wacky impedance versus frequency curves. So that means you have a very good amplifier for driving in-ear monitors with this. Now, it's not only just that sophisticated, it has basic stuff such as if you plug something into the 3.5mm socket, it will cut out the RCA inputs. It also charges via a USB-C connector, so you can use any old charger. And to get it out of the way, I heard nothing detrimental about leaving it plugged into a charger, which was plugged into the board, connected to a whole bunch of computer peripherals, which are probably generating heaps and heaps of noise. And as you can leave it running as a desktop amp in that mode with no audible detriment to the sound, at least that I could hear, and I don't have measuring gear to test if it even changes anything at all. So excellent in that regard. It also has battery indicator lights, which will also flash if something's wrong. It has a volume control that is not just a volume pot, but a digitally controlled stepped attenuator with, well, if I turn it on, the lights will flash, for example. If I get it in focus there. And then after that, when I turn this, maybe you can just hear it click, it will click to indicate that the volume is now engaged, and then there are 34 steps. When you adjust it, you probably may hear a little tiny pop, 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 pop as each step is made internally, which is maybe not the most ideal, but it does the job. But one of the cool features is with the gain switch, let's say I'm in low gain like I am now, if I switch it into high gain, it won't just jump up to the higher gain level, but will ramp up slowly using the volume control so that you don't suddenly get your ears blasted out if you've accidentally hit that switch or you've actually pushed things too high for your setup. Now about that, I of course tested this amplifier with everything from good old in-ear monitors. I have my Crinical's favorite in-ear monitor, the Solaris, just kidding, and these are of course very, very sensitive in-ear monitors, and they're very good for testing not only the quality of amplifiers, but also whether they produce noise. So I can say that, for example, this might be a good amp to use with something like, and I showed it before, the Chord Hugo 2, if you're thinking of a transportable setup, because this has a fairly substantial battery. If not the best battery life, especially if you get the high power version, which may only have about 2.5 hours battery. But in that case, I still wanted to see whether I should use the volume control of the Hugo 2 or the volume control of this to control the amplifier. Now I can say that the volume control turned all the way up to maximum, even in low gain with the Solaris or similar campfire audio models, that they could still hear a little bit of noise and hiss and it wasn't ideal. Probably best to leave the volume control somewhere around the midpoint and then maybe adjust the volume via either the volume control or the Hugo 2. So the best input was about line level in working in that kind of setup. So not perfect, but still at the lower and mid volume levels, I didn't hear any hiss or any untoward noise coming from any system I connected it to. So it did pass with flying colors in that, and more about the sound with in-ear monitors later, because there are some interesting results versus the Hugo 2, which I generally really like with in-ear monitors. Likewise, in terms of power, now the original RM version only has 1 watt of output from the 6.5mm socket and 500 milliwatts from the 3.5mm socket. So the current output in the high-powered version, the H version, goes up to 1.3 watts. And while it's probably not like speaker amp ideal that for the Modhouse Tungsten, it actually does work really well. It took actually I tend to listen at a fairly moderate listening level, 70, 80 dBs. I don't either listen super quietly, and I don't like listening loud at all. Maybe things might jump up a bit to 90 dBs sometimes. To actually get this to clip did require pushing my luck, which was listening to, say, a movie soundtrack with extremely low bass, like Cradle to the Grave, which I use as a test track. That has bass which is designed to run through subwoofers in movie theaters and rumble things to make things seem really scary. And then I could turn up the volume and very quickly get a high SPL, at least through the bass range, and then get it to clip. But regular bass music such as Amon Tobin, and I have a few tracks, like even from the new Basement tapes, has a really low bass rumble. I didn't have any issues at all there. But then again, I don't listen super loud to begin with. But still, the amp held it together very well in terms of amplification. Actually, speaking of that, when I first got the original 23RM, I felt that the sound initially was a little bit closed in. So I basically left it on for a couple of days playing music, and then the soundstage, widened up a bit, and it certainly became very comparable to a lot of the high-end amps I have here. Actually sounds very similar to the headphone output of the Chord TT2 in that regard, although it actually in some respects improved on that, which I'll talk about in a bit. But to have something this small, do things that are comparable to my really high-end amps, I've got the Shit Audio Mjolnir, and whether it's a high-end amp or not is maybe subjective. The Studio 6, the big tube amp, which unfortunately is no longer being made as far as I know. And I've also got in my friend's Luxman P750U, which while he was on holiday, which I've been enjoying listening immensely. To have something this small and at that price actually fit into a high-end system is really fantastic. And considering how beautiful this amp is, I mean, it is just the fit and finish and assembly is really gorgeous. That made me really want to actually go and buy one. But with the power output a little bit limited, I thought, I wish it had a little bit more power. And that's where I really am happy that they made the H version, the 23RMH, because that gives that little bit of extra power that makes it more substantial to use than just using the output power of, say, a Hugo 2, if you wanted something like a high-end portable setup with both of them. Now, of course, if you're using this with, say, a DAP of some kind, make sure it has a good quality single-ended line out. To that end, I have various exotic adapters, which, see 3.5 millimeter adapters. Actually, someone gave me this one years ago in Japan. Supposedly it has some weird metal in it. Maybe it's silver or rhodium or something. But anyway, I have a bunch of stuff in the drawer. And I will say that the 3.5mm connector and 3.5mm connectors in general tend to have a little bit more crosstalk than RCA connectors, something that's also been observed on the Hugo 2. And the soundstage was a little bit better using a RCA cable than using 3.5 to 3.5. Still, it was still excellent. Where things made a difference was how transparent this amp is. In that whatever I used, going from the TT2 obviously to an amplifier, there's a little bit of signal loss, but it was extremely minimal with the 23RMH and the 23RM for that matter, enough that I would actually consider using it as a main amp with the TT2 and M scaler setup in my system, or especially on the go with Hugo 2 and 2 Go. Now, compared to the direct output of a Hugo 2, for instance, I was actually surprised to find that the drive of the Solaris, and actually I've also got my other favorite IEMs, the Final A8000s, was actually better from the RMH, and the RM I should say, because they have the same voltage amplifier, than it was from the Hugo 2. Actually, there were a few tracks where I felt that the bass was bloomy and bloated with the Hugo 2, something I actually hadn't really noticed before, as I don't do a huge amount of IEM listening, as many people know, something I hope to rectify a bit in the future. So when I did run both of these IEMs, which are dynamic driver and balanced armature plus dynamic driver respectively, I felt that the bass control out of the voltage amplifier was definitely superior to that of the Hugo 2. It was almost a shock to actually notice that. And this is level matched, by the way. This isn't just me plugging them in. I did manage to level match them within 0.1, well, about 0.2, 1 or 2 dBs of each other, as far as you can, with both of them having essentially stepped volume controls. And it was actually quite a surprise that the bass control was considerably better. So that led me on to trying it with full-sized headphones, and I've run the Dan Clark Audio series, E3, Stealth, Expanse, actually, which I should talk about separately in this, from the current output as well, and also the new Susvara unveiled behind me, and the Tungsten. Now, the Tungsten I didn't really try with the Hugo 2, but comparing even the TT2 with in-ear monitors versus the 23RMH, and then the Hugo 2 versus the 23RMH. Headphone driving ability was definitely better with the 23RM8. You can tell there's better drive because there's better bass coming through there. Sometimes in some setups the Hugo 2 can sound maybe a touch anemic, and also the TT2 can as well. So if you want something that's transportable that won't sound anemic, this definitely did the job. Another thing I got in for review is this Dethonray Listening M1, which is also a compact device, although it's a DAC amp as such. It actually is more exactly the same dimensions, on at least from top down, as the 23RM and RMH, which is very interesting. And it can also be programmed to have high power output. Now, using the regular power output and the in-ear monitor output, I decided to compare them, mainly using the Susvara Unveiled as the headphone. Now, I felt that the sound with, again, level matched within 0.1 dB from the Listening M1 was slightly more dynamic sounding, but this is a desktop amp with a wall wart. And once I put one of my capacitor power filters in line with the wall wart to the Listening M1, some of that dynamic went away, even though this was something, the capacitor bank that generally boosts the power going to an amplifier. So I wonder if there's a little bit of maybe noise interference from that power bank in here, which is making the sound a little bit more dynamic. So I'd probably say that the Listening M1, which is about $700 more expensive, we're talking $2,600 versus say $3,300. Definitely, if you want a more linear, uncolored sound, I'd probably say the 23RM and the 23RMH do that better. Though, of course, the less expensive Dethonray has, of course, a DAC inside it, but this was comparing out of the Chord TT2 and M scaler setup. So it's kind of a different setup altogether. You can use a 23RMH as a desktop amp, but the Dethonray has, of course, a DAC and an amp and has more flexibility, but you can't take it with you because it's not portable. You know, I have one big problem with this amp, and that's I want to keep it. But I need more amps, well, like I need more headphones. That's not going to happen. But if you're looking for a compact but reasonably powerful, as 1.3 watts can do good, I'd say step up to the 23RMH. But if you're looking for something with a longer battery life, because you can get up to 5 hours from the voltage output, and then you're 3.5 hours from the current output in the RM, and it's only 2.5 hours from the RMH. If you're looking for a powerful but small, well, it's almost desktop or transportable because it's not lightweight with a big battery inside, this really kicks ass and is, I think, really worth the $3,000 or $3,300. So compared to my experience back when it was Bakoon International, the HPA-01, totally different. This, I wish, had existed, you know, the 10 odd years ago when I had the HPA-01. I wouldn't have gone with all this big gear. If it had been that case, I could have cleared it all out. Actually, if I wasn't reviewing gear, would clear out all my stuff and probably get this one. So the question you all probably have is, how is it with the Tungsten? Well, I'm going to talk about that in my review of the Tungsten as I ran it through a lot of amps, including, of course, the RMH, which it actually pairs quite nicely with all things considered. So as always, thanks again to ENLEUM and Suin for sending me this and the Modhouse Tungsten set for review. And also thank you to everyone who has been supporting my work. For more information on that, do check out the links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when I have my Modhouse Tungsten review out. As always, thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you online.